Yeah, we're
sure.
on.
Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we've got a very exciting episode for you. Our 100th episode, we're doing a question and answer episode, answering all of your questions, our loyal listeners, giving you something back there, talking about ankle issues in squatting, the differences in strength training for men versus women, the future of personal training, and many more interesting topics. So stay tuned and hopefully you'll hear some interesting answers. But before we get into that, something important we have to tell you. We are celebrating our 100th episode with a giveaway. To celebrate, we are running a giveaway competition where you can win a muscle imbalance assessment. And one thing we want to make clear is that this can be from anywhere in the world. It doesn't have to be in London. If you're in London, then we can do one IRL, but we've done many of these over Skype, especially through COVID. So we've been looking at the stats, and actually we've seen we have listeners all over the world. There's actually very few countries we're not in. So we want to give a quick shout out to the 1,400 listens we've had in just Virginia State in the US. We've also had 44 listens in China, and 28 in Kazakhstan. I think we've got a backpacker down in South America because we've got 1 or 2 listens in a lot of the South American countries. So big shout out if that's you. Let us know who you are and we'll say hi. And 1 in Iran and 3 in Kenya. So even though you're all the way over there, guys, you're still more than welcome to enter this competition and receive your prizes digitally. So back to the competition itself. You can win a muscle imbalance assessment, 2 months of stronger group coaching, also remote, and a call with both of us to talk about anything you want, hopefully fitness related. All you need to do to enter is share an episode of Lunge and Lift on your Instagram story and tag us at lunge.lift. You can do this as many times as you like before the deadline, which is the 16th of February, Wednesday at midnight. You can also subscribe on YouTube for 2 entries. If you're already subscribed, please leave a comment on one of our videos to let us know you're there. And you can also get 3 entries if you write us a review on Apple Podcasts. So get entering, guys. Just a couple of days left by the time this episode airs, but we'd love to hear from you. And yeah, just want to say thank you for your loyal listenership. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys, and really hope you enjoyed today's episode. So, where shall we start, Ash?
We've got actually an old question left over from a previous Q&A from Fernsagram, also known as Lewis Ferns, who actually in the meantime has signed up for the training stimulus mentorship, so maybe he knows the answers already. But his question is, I'm getting a blocking sensation in the front of my ankle, which is causing pronation of the foot to access more range when I'm at the bottom of a squat. What can I do to help that? So I think this is quite a common issue people experience when squatting, in that they get this blocking feeling at the front of the ankle. And as a principle, whenever there is tightness or a hypomobility, there will be a neighboring hypermobility to make up for it. So Lewis is getting stiffness in the front of his ankle, and then the rest of his foot is excessively mobile to make up for the lack of motion that he's getting there. So there's kind of 2 parts to this. That blocking at the front of the ankle is where the talus bone sits, which is essentially the link between the foot and the leg. And that's quite a common point of blockage. And what we want to do there is mobilize the talus so that it can move more to allow the dorsiflexion to come from the ankle, whilst also stabilizing the forefoot where there's potentially excessive pronation, which might present as a flat foot. For the talus, one thing we want to focus on is the transverse plane, so rotation. So if you're doing sort of ankle stretches, driving internal rotation from the hip, so sort of top down, so to speak, and for the forefoot to stabilize it, we want to load it. And a simple way to do that would either be to shift more weight onto the forefoot or use some sort of wedge to lengthen and strengthen the muscles and tissues of that forefoot. It's a little bit of a nuanced one there, but
I found because I had something very similar when I was trying to learn to pistol, And because I found in that blocking sensation wouldn't necessarily be there when I was using lifters. So that was obviously then increased that range of motion in the ankle. And it was then a lot easier for my knee to essentially track over towards my big toe and kind of allow me that extra range. So, but obviously the lifters were like a nice, like short-term fix to kind of help me do the work still. But then obviously I still had to pay attention because I remember obviously talking to you way back, and we fixed this quite comfortably, and then it was able to do pistols without lifters in just normal nanos. And yeah, it was it's definitely one of those ones where I found, because I then become very conscious of that essentially blocking sensation, that discomfort, I was constantly then kind of like stretching it out. So always kind of rotating my hip and like pushing my knee inwards to kind of, because being the talus being like a sliding bone, you knew that as you push inwards and across that you could feel that movement, and it always felt really quite nice. So
there you go.
yeah. So
Right,
number
what's
2,
next?
let's go into Rod Shepherd's. So let's just note down at the time, 5:45. Right. I have a noddy health question for you. Guy in a squash, a guy in our squash team, always been a bit chunky since leaving uni. Few inches shorter than me, but weighs about 85 to 87 kilos. He's now working with a nutritionist and cut out alcohol, carbs and desserts, etc. He mostly blames his bad metabolism and says it's easier for him to gain weight. Is that fair, or does he just eat badly? Obviously plays squash a lot and does spinning, so it's unlikely to be an exercise thing. It's an interesting question, because I think for something like that, that seems like, I'd say quite a lot of people, they do all the work and nothing really comes out of it. They're like, why am I not losing weight? Oh, I need to eat less and I need to do even more.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, thank you for your question, Rod. And for listeners who don't know how tall he is, he's just about 6 foot, I think. So, it's not, the guy's not massively heavy for somebody just under 6 foot. But yeah, what's he say? A bit chunky since leaving uni. So I think the first thing to say is that there's a lot of factors involved in metabolism and weight gain or weight loss. And what do I say to this guy? The first thing would be to, obviously, diet and exercise are the 2 biggest pieces of the puzzle that we can directly influence. So if and only if his exercise are on point and his nutrition is on point. So by that, I mean, he's been in a sensible calorie deficit for a good few weeks, which his nutritionist, I'm sure, will be helping him with. Then we need to look at other factors that might be at play, because, if you're burning more than you're spending, burning more than you're taking in, then you should be in a deficit and you should be losing weight. And if you're not, then something a bit weird or a bit unusual will be going on. That would be the point when I'd look to get your blood work done with your nutritionist to see if there's anything going on hormonally. Maybe there's a thyroid issue or something like that. Also look at your lifestyle factors like sleep, work, stress, relationships, those sorts of things. If there's any external factor that's going to be involved in affecting your metabolism. And I think it's a common sentiment. People say it's easy for them to gain weight more than other people. And my perspective on this is everyone gets dealt a hand in life as to what you're predisposed to. And you can attribute your situation to your genetics, and obviously it's a huge factor, but it doesn't really change the fact that you've just got to do the best with what you've got. Whether you're gifted or you've been dealt a tough hand, you still just got to work with whatever you've got given. So maybe he is predisposed to hold weight a little bit more easily, but it doesn't change the fact that being disciplined with your training and nutrition is still the best way forwards for you.
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially because, I can kind of sympathize with this. I'm a good 15 kilos heavier than 85 kilos, but and I'm just under 6 foot. So I would definitely say, I think you mentioned there obviously about the sheer amount of cardio this person is doing, especially like spinning and squash, 2 relatively high intensity like workouts. And a lot of the time, as I found with people that have done a lot of high intensity workouts, so even like say a CrossFit class, if you think about a CrossFit class, the actual high intensity part's actually quite short. Normally, say the last like 10-15 minutes, and the rest of it is either skill work, strength work. And for me, the glaring thing here is lacking any, well, by the sounds of it, lacking any strength work and any type of muscle building essentially within that. And if you're just essentially asking your body to constantly expend energy rather than use it to build, you want to start asking, am I actually eating right here? Because when you sort of say about being in a sensible deficit, I guess if you are working with a nutritionist, they should be quite clear about what's going on and be able to help you. And put it out there, if you haven't had any good results with them over a period of time, then maybe it's time to swap nutritionists. We've got some good episodes with Liam from PH Nutrition. Definitely check out those episodes and listen back. We'll put links to them in the description box down below, and kind of give you a good starting place. But I'm definitely someone who says I'm a bit more chunkier and I can easily put on weight, and it just means I have to be a lot more conscious about how much I'm eating, because I can eat a lot. So I just have to make sure, in a way, I'm kind of constantly just ever so slightly hungry, because as long as I know there, I'm eating smart. And that's kind of how I've been trying to be without, say, tracking my food now. I've been trying to eat a little bit just more. So I'm leaving myself with a little bit of hunger rather than eating till I'm stuffed, as I used to always do. So, yeah.
I think, I want to just double down on your resistance training point. That I think it's a common mistake for people trying to lean up, that you want to keep your muscle mass. Your muscle mass is one of the most metabolically active tissues in the body. So you need to give your body a business case to hang on to it. And if you're not stimulating that muscle, then your body will eat into that muscle when you're in a deficit, because it doesn't feel like it needs it. And as you lose muscle, your metabolic rate will go down because there's less tissue that's using energy. So you want to keep that expenditure high outside of the gym as well, by holding more muscle or hanging on to the muscle that you've currently got. So I would definitely recommend maybe swapping out one of the spin sessions for a lifting session.
Yeah, a nice full body session, something like that, get some strength work. It also that will carry over to everything you do anyway. Being stronger is definitely better for life. So also, from a client's experience as well, I got her working with a nutritionist, and now she's eating more than she's ever eaten, and then she's still losing weight. And that's because she was massively under eating, doing loads of work. And it's like, look, you're under recovering. So even when you're going to sleep, you're just not putting yourself in a state, because burning fat and burning energy is a luxury, right? To some degree, especially if you're doing it for aesthetic reasons, because you want to be a bit lighter on your feet. Like, your body's going to try and keep as comfortable as possible. So yes, definitely something that, it's definitely worth thinking about if it's affecting things like your sleep, and you might not be eating enough, which kind of sounds a bit counterintuitive when you're trying to lose weight. So I think we covered that one. Got a really nice one here from Callum15. How to blend strength training and ultra running. I thought this was really cool, especially because we've had previous show guest Brad Welch on. Had him on twice discussing, because he's an ultra runner himself and has definitely worked within strength training. I think something that we kind of always come to is understanding your goal and making sure you understand what is your priority, to be strong or to be good at ultra running, or are you being stronger to improve your ultra running? So then how specific is your training going to be for that? And I think that's something that we've, especially as much you've said it to me over the time when I dabbled in the triathlon world, and I realized I was really struggling to get my strength training in because of the volume of, say, Ironman training, essentially what I was doing. I just didn't have that time, so my strength training went to pot, and I realized that my body started to break down in other ways. So I really had to find ways to prioritize what was my actual goal, to get good at triathlon or to be strong at triathlon. So what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think, you hit the nail on the head there. It completely depends on your goal and priorities. So are you an ultra runner where your priority is performing as well as possible in ultra running, or do you like doing ultra running and want to be strong for life? Or do you want to be very strong and get your strength numbers up? Because the approach will be very different for each set of priorities. So let's go through them. I guess to maximize your ultra running performance, you basically want to do as little strength training as is necessary to support your ultra running. So depending on how strong you already are, you basically want to be thinking of it almost as like a prehab type strength training, in that you're just strengthening your body for the demands of ultra running, rather than necessarily looking to get significantly stronger in strength-based pursuits. If you're looking to get strong for life, then you probably want to dial down the ultra running, because that's not optimal for that, and it's a huge drain on your body's resources. And what was the third one? I can't remember what I detailed as the third one, of just getting stronger to actually be strong. Same really applies, in that ultra running is not a great support for making strength gains, so dialing down the ultra running accordingly. There's a school of thought called the consolidation of stresses. But I think a big proponent of it is a guy called Alex Viada, the hybrid athlete, and he's basically a powerlifter turned Ironman. So it's probably worth checking him out if you're interested, Callum. He advocates bunching together the similar stimuli in the week. So you might do your heavy lifting and fast sprinty or interval work on Monday, Tuesday, and then do your longer duration, slower work towards the end of the week. And the theory is that even though you're training a lot or every day, you are resting your energy systems. So you're resting that high intensity energy system early in the week, and you're resting vice versa. You're resting the long duration stuff early in the week, and then you're resting the intense stuff later in the week. I haven't actually done that myself or with any of my clients. I do periodize within a block for CrossFitters in a similar way, but I'm not sure how much research is actually out there to support that theory.
Yeah, I've done that and myself. So when I realized that, when I was obviously training for the triathlon stuff, when I managed to find a way to structure my week so that I could get more work in, so I could get my resistance training, because I knew I needed it, because I was not only missing it, but I knew I felt like I just needed to do some strength work. And I found I did very similar. I made sure I kind of got this, because the sprint sessions were also that bit shorter. They were a lot more high intense. They were definitely intense, and whether they were and as well, I'd kind of go for running intervals on the Monday and sprint intervals on the Tuesday, and then I'd have my leg day so I did like full body on 2 days, but I kind of did like anterior and posterior. So I kind of kept the volume relatively low and made sure on my running days I was doing anterior, and on my cycling days I was doing posterior. So it's very similar. And it helped me. It did help me, because then I had low and slow, and I wasn't as good at the low and slow stuff. I found that was quite a stress on me. And so because of that, I needed more time to recover, because especially just that constant pounding of the joints. So even though the energy systems were different, the stresses were different, because I'm obviously, say, 100 kilos running along, and like it was still a challenge. So even though it was supposed to be relatively easy, as I say, like zone 2 kind of stuff, it was always still very challenging. But I think the key thing was there that you said at the start about that thing of prioritizing, understanding what it is. And if you are trying to do strength training, you're going to think, okay, what is the bare minimum that I need to do to make me feel good? And for me, I've definitely found front squatting, deadlifting, strict pressing, and pull-ups. Like for me, just real simple exercises that kind of, they didn't take too much away. Like for instance, I found when I was trying to keep my benching in, I started to get a bit of shoulder pains, because again, cycling, shoulders pull forward, running, shoulders a lot of the time be pull forward. So all these positions, and then it helped me long term. So strict pressing was a really nice thing for me to throw in. But yeah, just prioritize, as Ash said.
Cool. All right. So next question we have from Josh Yanak, good friend of the show. He's asking about morning movement. What does Ash do? Also, what lunge protocol would you recommend for 10 minutes? So I think he's referring to the morning routines episode, where I mentioned that I do some movement mechanics first thing in the morning. So let's tackle that one first. For me, I do some specific personal bits. Basically, I've had a lot of I've torn ankle ligaments and my MCL, so I'm doing bits to continually manage that. I don't have any issues currently, but just staying on top of it, working on some foot mechanics. And I guess to make it more useful to listeners, the principle is that I'm keeping my feet mobile and working on my pronation mechanics, but also on stability and power relevant to squash and running, which is the main demands on my feet and ankles. So doing some stretches, calf stretches, some balances, and also some hip stretches and lunges that help with the knee injuries I've had in the past. So super basic, but 5 to 10 minutes of that in the morning just gets me moving and feeling good for the rest of the day. In terms of a 10-minute lunge protocol that I would recommend, my go-to is what I call the stimulus 6 lunges. And anything that's a stimulus 6 is basically moving in both directions in all 3 planes of motion. So I will do 30 alternating forward lunges, alternating side lunges, alternating rotating lunges. So that would be the first 3 exercises. Then I'd go reverse lunges, crossover lunges, and rotating the opposite way. So like a turning crossover lunge. So it's 180 lunges, takes about 6 to 10 minutes, depending how quickly you move through them. But basically, the principle there is that you're exposing the ankles and hips to all 6 of their joint motions. Rob, can you tell us what the 6 joint motions are?
Don't call me out now. Don't call me out. No, I can't. You know about recording stuff.
It's part of his homework. So basically, like the ankles, you want to make them experience dorsiflexion, plantarflexion, inversion, eversion, adduction, and abduction. And then the hips, we want to run them through flexion, extension, adduction, abduction, and internal and external rotation. And in those 6 lunges, those joints will experience all those motions, and you'll get nice and warm without getting too taxed.
Would you say for someone that's doing that for the first time to start with 30, because that feels like a lot of lunges for someone that's never done that, would you say that'd be all right?
For our listeners,
Josh, I know for Josh, maybe in particular, I know he does a lot of this stuff, but
the thing is, you can break them up. So you could do less of each lunge, or you could just do 30 rest, 30 rest, 30 rest. It's 15 steps on each leg. Think of it that way. So it's actually not a huge load. But if you're not used to lunging, then it might feel like a lot, especially with their unusual directions.
It was more that, because I'm just thinking about like how your glutes and hips will feel, say moving, like say doing like crossover or anything like that. I know personally when I throw that type of stuff into my training, is like I get some really nice DOMs from that kind of stuff, just because again most of my movement isn't that way, so I don't need to do much to get the type of stimulus that feels great afterwards. So I think it follows on. This question is great from Pete McNeil, another friend of the show. Why lunge? How is it so transferable to day-to-day life / sports?
The big one. Yeah. So everybody knows I love lunges. And let's go through a couple of the reasons why. So I think something that's not appreciated enough about human anatomy is that the body has evolved around gait. If we look at the bone structure, where the muscles origin and insert on those bones, it's very clear that the musculature of the body is for walking gait. The way everything works together is so that we can move our bodies through space. It's for transportation. And when we're training, I believe we should work in harmony with that physiology rather than just creating random movements that don't actually suit our bodies. There's a time and a place for that. I'm sure a lot of sports aren't just walking or running. But if we're trying to tap into how the body wants to move, then gait is how it wants to move. So if gait is how the body wants to move, that's essentially walking. And how do we exaggerate walking? By lunging. The bone rotations, joint motions, and like muscles lengthening and shortening are very closely, or if not almost exactly, mimicked and exaggerated in a walking lunge as compared to walking or running. So it's just a very natural way to strengthen everything, bones, joints, and muscles, kind of in proportion to how our body wants to be stimulated. And I guess the next part of the question is, how is it transferable to sports? Sports, obviously, a lot of sports involve transporting your body through space. So if you're playing a field sport or you're running or anything like that, We can obviously replicate the specific mechanics of the sport very well, depending what the sport is. But that transportation is usually quite a big part of most sports. So we can easily replicate and overload those mechanics to get a training stimulus. And this covers stuff like change of direction. We're also working relevant mobility and stability, because most of the time in sport we're standing up and in uneven stance, which is another benefit of lunges because they're unilateral. And one of the other reasons I love lunges is that everything gets strengthened or trained kind of more in proportion to how the body's actually going to use whatever movement qualities we're talking about. So, a lot of people say that squats the king of exercise, and I think they're a great exercise. But one of the drawbacks of squats as compared to lunges for sport is that in squatting, you'll develop strength that you can't necessarily stabilize because you're in a very stable environment. You've got a barbell, you're in perfect bilateral setup. There's loads of stability given to you. Whereas actually, if you're trying to generate force in sport, you're usually on one foot if you're running, like you're not on 2 feet ever in running, and you're looking to change direction. So you need to create stability for yourself. So by doing lunges, you're actually training that stability more in proportion with the strength you develop. And sure, you won't ever be as strong in terms of pure force development if you don't squat. But for the general person doing non-barbell sports, the lunges will probably prepare them better than bilateral work.
Yeah, I think that's a nice little case for lunges there. I definitely think where the fact that the unilateral side of stuff is the fact you can't load up lunging as much as you can with a bilateral movement, I think is a prime example of how you can get more out of less as well. And that's what I've definitely found with lunging myself. Anyone that's done, say, a set of even barbell walking lunges know how gassy and you can use a fair amount less work. And so that's obviously taken it into quite a gym specific exercise, being a barbell exercise. But lunges are definitely one of those ones which, again, getting that feeling of DOMS, for me, it's such good, feeling in legs, good mind muscle connection, and you feel like you've worked everything. And that is a thing, especially when you are squatting bilaterally, where you might have some weaknesses or some biases towards positions. Something that you're going to just constantly get away from it. Like, for instance, I know where my hips used to shift a lot, one of the directions. Say if it used to shift to the right, I'm always then going to be missing that left glute activation on the way back up, because I'm always shifting out of it and trying to get into the right leg more, which means our left leg isn't working as much. So lunging was a way to kind of bring up that balance, because obviously I'm more of a gym athlete. But it is funny because the way, I know we've discussed this in previous episodes, but where we discuss people say how squats and deadlifts key building strength and really carries over to everything. But even though they are, I think, a great staple, and I know obviously when they're talking about squats and deadlifts being made like a hinge and a knee flexion exercise, it's the walking or lunge in general is a great way to kind of combine some of that as well.
Massively, yeah, completely agree. And I think to touch on the loading point, I've seen guys lunging 120, 140 kilos because they built up to it sensibly. Yeah. So it's not to say you can't get a really big strength stimulus through lunging.
I do.
You just got to earn it.
I do 100 gears. Is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. There's no reason you can't get a really strong strength stimulus if you've built up to it sensibly. And the benefit of that is that you have built stability along with the strength that exceeds the stability you would train through just bilateral movements.
Yeah, and I think also with lunges, I think something that I'm a big fan of in general, especially when I throw in my training, is when you're training the feeling rather training the position. And what I mean by that is because if, for instance, when you're lunging based on, say, CrossFit standards, a back knee hitting the floor and stuff like that, you're losing that stability side. You're just now making it look like a lunge based on, say, what CrossFit says a lunge is, rather than what a lunge is in the body. And how often in, say, sports and stuff is that one knee hitting the floor and then you're generating that? It's just not, is it? So I've personally found when you do keep that back knee off the floor, even if it's close to the floor or lightly tapping the floor, if you've got that range, then great. And especially I know when I watch myself do my walking lunges with the heavier loads, I use the back knee on the floor to essentially stabilize myself a bit more. So I probably don't even need that 100 kilos. It was just pure laziness of loading the bar. But it's yeah, it's definitely something that when you do think more about what it feels like rather than what it looks like, I think is a really key thing as well. So, right, next one. How do you say their surname?
Elon Brugman.
Yeah,
I
I
believe
didn't want to
was.
butcher it. Where can I
Yeah,
learn more about movement mechanics? Well, Mr.
lovely
Movement Mechanics
question.
himself.
Yeah. As it happens, I run a company called Training Stimulus, where we run a movement mechanics mentorship, and the next intake is in March, uh, or maybe April, depending on how things pan out. But yeah, more information coming soon. If you're interested in that, then please register at thetrainingstimulus.com, and you can be like Coach Rob, who's just started his own journey learning more about movement mechanics.
Yeah, I mean, so this was something which, for someone that's been in the industry for as long as I have, COVID taught me that it was, even though I got the opportunity to talk to loads of people and I get to talk to Ash on a like weekly basis, and I needed some structure in my. I kind of wanted to further my education on movement mechanics, so I thought it would really add some more to the service that I offer. So investing in the training mentorship was has been great. I've only done two seminars so far, and I'm. Hannah says I always do this. I take on too many things at once, you know. So obviously, started your training mentorship, building up my client base, building a new gym. Like I'm doing a lot at the same time and trying to fit it all in, and I'm trying to train for a powerlifting meet. So ahead of a lot. But just on this, I mean, I'm obviously going to be biased because I'm going to say how good it is. But the detail that you've got into in the first two sessions alone, it's definitely opened my eyes to so much more. And that's the thing. I think a lot of the reasons why I decided to sign up to your mentorship as well is because even though I can kind of understand why a lot of things happen, I wanted to know deeper why and how to fix them, that specifically, not globally. I wanted to go right down to the actual source. And that's where even just some of the stuff when we talk about is because a lot of this terminology doesn't come to my tongue as easy as yours. Like, I know all the planes of motion and I know a lot of those things, but to call it like that is a lot more challenging for me. So Elon, definitely recommend it. Worth the investment.
Thank you.
Sorry. No, that wasn't a rehearsed plug, but that's legit. So, right, let's go into the next one from Yusuf Golden. What does the future of personal training look like? I really like this question.
Yeah, good question. Thank you, Yusuf. For me, I think the industry or personal training is going to become quite polarized in that personal trainers will go either very high end or people will turn to cheaper tech-led services because as I think especially since COVID, things have accelerated in terms of app-driven fitness offerings, which can actually be really good and really cheap. So people who don't want to spend much money, why would you get a really cheap shit personal trainer when actually you can spend a few pounds on an app which is really, really good?
Yeah.
The only reason why you might do that, in my mind, is that some people like the interpersonal relationship, they like the motivation, and some company. But I think a lot of those people are starting to look to classes where you'll get the same sort of thing. You get the motivation, you get good company, you get community, and maybe better training than a really bad, cheap PT. And the other side of the coin is that the PTs who are good and that are worth the money will just start charging more because they're going to be in high demand. Excuse me. So yeah, that's how I see it sort of panning out over the next few years. Is it's going to polarize in that you get really good PTs, cream rising to the top, and then bad PTs are going to struggle to have a business because they're going to get cannibalized by tech and apps. I think the other thing I see happening is that PTs are adding more strings to their bow. So it's not just going to be training focused. You see people like branch out into whether they're a movement specialist or they are working towards mental health qualifications. I know a couple of trainers who are getting qualified as counselors and psychotherapists, which is a huge undertaking, but it sort of shows you that holistic offering of I'm not just going to help you build muscle and lose fat. I'm actually going to help you move better. I'm going to help you think better and providing a more rounded human development experience, I guess.
Yeah,
What do you
no,
think?
I fully agree as well, because seeing the online world was already coming in the fitness space. It was just quite steady, as you know, but COVID just accelerated that massively. And same as like the home gym spaces and stuff like that, because now people have built out their home gyms and a lot of them are keeping it. And they're like, do you know what? This is good. I can get some decent online programming for nearly every PT that I say respect. So if I want to follow someone's training methodology, I can follow that. If I need a PT, I can maybe get it once a week, once a month, whatever, you know, get some touching base to kind of check on my movement mechanics or anything like that, or maybe different outlooks. I feel the only thing is, though, is as you said, like with the remote side of things, I think the community aspect does get lost, which I know you've mentioned as where people that might go towards classes and stuff. But I think as a whole, I think it's quite, unless if you've had a good PT, you'll know, because then that PT will look at you on that day, talk to you at the start of the session, kind of get you moving and stuff, judge who you are that day, and say, right, actually, we're going to take this session this direction. And that's something that, you know, I pride myself on. Like when someone comes to me, if they've had a bit of a shit day or shit week, you know, maybe they were supposed to build up to something quite heavy. And I'm like, do you know what? I'm not necessarily going to say to them, today you're not going to build heavy because you're stressed. I'm going to just gear the session towards a win that they feel good about. And it might be completely off plan, but they're going to leave feeling better. And again, that does obviously come down to the person's specific goals. You know, if they're training for something in particular, you just have to man up and get on with it. Like, you know, you've got a goal, you've got to do the work, you've got to get towards it. And you might have to adjust little things, but you need to kind of get the foundations of your goal specific training done. But when you are looking for just general well-being, improved health, get stronger, maybe lose some body fat, whatever, a lot of the time it's about managing that stress and making you feel better. And I think when you mentioned there about like trainers going more into other sectors, you know, so movement mechanics, psychology side of stuff, is because I think we have an opportunity to work with someone multiple times a week, and most people don't even get that with anyone else. Like, you know, they see like their doctor if they need to, they see their dentist because they feel they have to every say 6 months. All these people, but with the trainer, I think coming from it, but being a personal trainer myself, is like you realize that when you understand that someone is giving you their time, so potentially say 4 times a month, 8 times a month or more, like 8 hours a month, that's a lot of a commitment to someone, and that's a really nice like thing to have. And I think personal trainers, I think as the industry is growing, I think we are starting to see you do need more strings to those bow, because if you just say, oh, I just do fat loss, and like what happens when that person kind of wants to change goals, or what happens when that person's had a bit of a bad day, you kind of want to maybe think about something, or they get injured. You know, if all you do is right, this is like the circuits you do, or this is what you do to say lose some body fat, say, and you haven't branched out into other areas of learning, it just really puts you into the corner, and that you're not going to be able to offer the best service possible to that client. So I definitely see as the industry, I think it's really good with people like the PFCA and that, you know, they're starting to raise the level of standards for trainers coming into the industry. I think that's massive, because I think most people know that have got into it, level 3 course is just not up to scratch. So like people like, say, the PFCA and stuff are now starting to build on that and say, no, this is actually what we think is the best way to kind of come in. And then, you know, you've got people like yourself offering then trainers even more of an opportunity to develop themselves further and be able to give more to their clients. So I guess I remember hearing a thing about personal trainers, how normally within 2 years, the stats is in people drop out in the first year, people drop out after 3. And normally if you've been in the industry over 5, you're kind of in it for life, because it's that thing of, if you've gone through the struggle at the start where you don't know who you are, you then think you know everything. And then you realize you don't know as much as you thought, and you continue that learning. And when you get to like year 5 of that thing of, right, I'm going to continue, you know that this is, because you have to love helping people with this industry. And this is where I think I see personal trainers themselves, like, we won't be going anywhere as a trade or anything, because even with all these apps and stuff like that are coming out, they just don't give you the personal side of it. It's just do this work. That might work. It most likely will. But what happens when you want to progress? So
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting stat. And I think, yeah, in my experience, it definitely holds true seeing it happen with other people. I think there's almost like an inflection point when you've been doing it for a certain amount of time. It means that you've hopefully of a decent standard, and then obviously the more people you've worked with, the more referrals you get, and it actually becomes easier to be a personal trainer compared to when you're starting out and you don't really know very much and you don't get any referrals. And yeah, it's a lot harder to get that momentum going. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Yusuf.
Right. Sandra. She's got a two-parter. Cheeky
She
Sandra.
has.
Does strength training for women differ from men? If yes, how? I think it'd be a really interesting discussion, because I think we had Chloe on recently, and we'll be hopefully getting her on again sometime soon as well to maybe dive a little bit deeper. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
For sure, yeah. So if you haven't checked that podcast out already, please do, Sandra. It's a great episode where Chloe essentially talks about a lot of the physiological differences between men and women, and obviously the menstrual cycle is a huge part of that. So I think one, acknowledging that we are biologically different is a huge part of things, and because of the menstrual cycle, my distillation of that episode, to sort of have a high level understanding of what happens throughout the course of the month is basically there's 2 weeks where things are good and two weeks when they're not so good. So when you're looking at strength training, men will be able to have a more sort of linear progression in that as they get stronger, generally speaking, the trend week to week will be upwards unless something's not working. Whereas for women, there's going to be a little bit more deviation around that trend line. So for 2 weeks, things might be really good. And then the next 2 weeks, they'd be not as good as you might expect for a male athlete. So almost expect those undulations in terms of rate of progression, and make sure you zoom out a little bit more to see your progress rather than being week to week. Because when you go from the second good week into the first bad week, you might feel like things aren't working when actually it's just the way your hormones are at that point in time that's affecting your performance. So I think that's a huge thing to understand for women and men and athletes and coaches, to factor that into your interpretation of your training results.
Yeah, I definitely think that's key, and but also on the flip side, yes, you need to then obviously that comes like down to the programming, making sure you're doing certain things at certain times of the month. But generally, the actual training itself isn't that different. Like we all do the same things. We're all going to get pretty strong doing the same, like whatever you're choosing to do to get stronger. But I've definitely found, and I'm not sure about you, but because I do train probably more women than men, and I've noticed a lot more like women, they can work so much closer to their top max lift, but a man can get obviously higher. So it's like, for instance, a woman could do more volume, so say do 3 reps at say 95% of their 1 rep max, and then hit one for 1 rep max. But then a guy would have to probably hit around that 85 to 90% to hit those 3 reps, and anything more than that, their form just breaks and everything. I've definitely found women can work harder at higher intensities better than men. What have you?
Yeah. So this is something I've come across a few times in the past, where basically women have better muscle endurance, and I think there is a physiological reason for this. I remember reading some research years ago now, where women can turn over submaximal weights better, but they'll be less able to consistently hit the high percentages. So they'll quite often, as soon as you go over that certain point, whether it's 95% or higher, or for some women it's a little bit lower in my experience, but they
Sorry,
will then
95 was that wasn't an exact number. I plucked. I was just saying. I wanted to get across to understand that women are great at working at high percentages and still keeping things tight and like high quality compared to men. Whether that's an
yeah.
ego thing or like just as you say, like actually there is a scientific reason behind that.
Yeah, so the way I sort of see this manifest is that women will be able to knock out higher rep sets at relatively high percentages, but as soon as you go into those highest percentages, there's quite a sudden drop off, whereas men will be able to hit those higher percentages a little bit more reliably. And so like I think the article probably wasn't very scientific that I read years ago, where they talk about cavemen and having to do more explosive stuff back in the day, whereas women would be much more around transport and longer sustained efforts in terms of their prehistoric tasks,
Yeah.
which, yeah, I don't want to go too far down that path because I'm not familiar with it, or comfortable talking about it too much. But that has been some of my experience working with female athletes, that they do tend to be able to do that. And so it depends, as always, on your goals. If you are looking to go for peak strength, then factor that in accordingly. But it might also explain why you're able to do more reps than your male counterpart at
They can just
those
also suffer better. Like they can put themselves into a hole and just suffer, and whether that's
higher
because
pain
obviously,
thresholds.
yeah, like, I mean, obviously, like pregnancy, like watching my
Yeah.
wife give birth, like I couldn't even imagine that, and just knowing that that's how we all come into the world, that every woman has gone through that. That's how as they given a child. Um, yeah, it's amazing to think of their pain tolerance is just so high. So yeah, I think we could probably learn something from that.
There's one more thing I've just remembered is that women are predisposed to be more flexible and mobile. So estrogen just generally is involved in muscle flexibility. So they are predisposed to be looser in the muscles, which is great from a mobility point of view, but it does mean that they're more predisposed to struggle to generate tension. So actually loading is really good for female bodies when they want to be active and to lift and to train hard to keep that tension in the muscles. And obviously the other huge consideration for a woman who's given birth is that postpartum, well, during the birthing process, a hormone called relaxin is released, and it literally relaxes the muscles to help in giving birth. And that can linger in the system for quite a while after giving birth. So if you're reintroducing exercise, you just need to proceed with caution that you're going to be a lot more mobile than you were before you gave birth. So moving a little bit slower and not jumping straight in at the deep end, because you can find your end joint ranges much more easily than you would have done before.
Yeah. And second part to the question is around training and mindset. And Sandra says, how much does our mind limit or boost our performance? How to overcome hardship, like positive self-talk and stuff like that.
Big one.
Yeah.
I think, how much does it limit or boost our performance? Hugely is my answer to that. A massive part of performing well is thinking well, or in a specific way. And when I read this question, it reminded me of something I did years and years ago in my old job. I think I went to like a lunch and learn session, and the person giving the talk was around, I can't remember what it was. It's something mental healthy, and they were talking about how your state of mind affects your physiology and vice versa. And the experiment we did, and like, I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't actually do it myself, but basically you'd go into partners, and one of you would hold out your hands just in front of you, and the other one would push down on the hands. And basically the first time you did it, they said, right, think of something really happy where you felt positive and powerful, maybe when you've,
Yeah.
had a big success in work or sport or life, whatever. And then the other person would push down on your hands, and you'd feel really strong, and the hands would go nowhere. And then straight after that, they say, right, now think about this time where you've been really sad. Maybe somebody's passed away, something really upsetting has happened in your life, and sort of really get into that moment and feel the feelings that came about from that event. And then doing that again, just being in that moment, the partner would push down on the hands, and everyone, including my own hands, just dropped without any
Yeah.
resistance. And the point of the experiment is basically whatever state of mind you're in actually has a huge impact on the regulation of your nervous system. So you will down regulate your capacity to generate force just because you're feeling down. And we see this massively in the body language of athletes. Like quite often, you can see in a match, whether it's football, tennis, whatever, an athlete, just you can see they're going to lose just
Yeah.
because their head's down, their shoulders are slumped, they're dragging themselves around with not much energy, not much pep. And it so often comes true from that point onwards that they then don't have the performance within them. And I think I just said it there, is that the way I like to think about this is that the mind affects the body, but the body also affects the mind. So you can use one to influence the other, in that forcing yourself into positive body language can actually result in an improvement in mood and energy and performance, and vice versa. So this is where like some of the cringy stuff like power posing, that, I think that was from some corporate training I did, when you're going into an important meeting, to just stand up tall, proud chest, like imagine you're Superman or something, to just get that confidence and get that high energy state, to interrupt maybe some negative self-talk or some doubts or whatever. And this is used a lot in sport as well. And psych up talks and motivations, like classic locker room stuff where people are slapping each other on the shoulders just to get in the zone. So I think for people just training in the gym, those are things that we can use as tools. Like when you turn up to the gym, if you're just dragging your ass in there, moping around, you're not going to lift as heavy as if you walk in really confident, and you can kind of fake it till you make it, and that you just get yourself into that state. And I think there's a lot to be gained from working on your mindset.
100%. I think the bit that you said there about the mindset that you have going into the gym, I think is key. But you just remember, even if you do go in flat, you can turn that around. And this is then where you might start with something a bit less skilled, and just, getting that blood moving, doing things like, say, the assault bike with some, like doing little circuits, some assault bike, some air squats, some push-ups, and really trying to get that mind right. That's where you might have that positive talk, or like, cool, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a good session. So that internal dialogue will start to turn your essentially placid self into more of an active self, that I'm about to crack on and do some work. I've massively seen this personally myself, like with, say, the back injury that I had with deadlifting, is like, I'm not necessarily any stronger or weaker. It's just my mind that determines how much I'm going to lift that day. Because recently I started training out of the Ronin Strength Gym, and the other day hit a 5 kilo PR on my top competition lift. Now, I'm not exactly load stronger since, say, the end of November-ish, right? Because with Christmas, the training's been all right. But to hit just 2.5 kilos under my lifetime PB was because when I was there, my mindset was like, that felt good. That when I was surrounded by people, positive talk, everyone's, amping you up, like, come on, Rob, that type of thing. So you're feeling like, yeah, I'm not on my own in the shed, kind of trying to lift and psych myself up and give myself that negative self-talk. And it's funny because I had 205 on the bar, watched back the video fast, and I was like, cool, I'm definitely going to go up. And the other guy that was there, he was like, I think you definitely got another 10, 15 kilos on that. And I thought, cool, that's going to put me to either 220 or 225. And I was like, 225 is 4 reds. I was like, because it's a 25 kilo bar. And I was just like, and I had the self-talk. I was like, should I go 20? Should I go 25? And I was like, no, fuck it. Just put 25 on and own it. Like, and at the end of the day, fuck it. If you fail, you fail. But I'm going to go in with the intent to hit it. And literally, that was it. I had that switch. I was like, right, get in, get it done. And like, stood back. I didn't rush it. I composed myself, made sure everything else was the same. I wanted to execute the lift like normal. And there was a moment on the way up where I hit that sticky point. And I know if I was probably in the shed, I probably wouldn't have thought that. But it felt like my chest exploded because I felt like this pain. But it wasn't necessarily the worst pain. It was just a really odd feeling. But I just pushed through. And it was because I had that mindset of just like, hit it. And I think a really good, for a CrossFitter, I think it's a really good example of when, if you do the open workout and you're really nervous before, and you do things like here and there, you do a bit shit. Second time you do it, you're like, I've done the workout. It's not going to hurt me. I know what it's still like. I can improve. I've got strategy. I've got this. I've got that. I can do better. And I've definitely found I remember doing open workouts where the second time round, because I wasn't so nervous, and because sometimes nervous energy is a good energy, but because I was more focused the second time round, it meant I performed it better. So there was less questions going through my head during the workout, because questions take away from the task at hand. And that's it, because it's just too noisy there. So you just want to say, you've got a strategy, you stick to it, you do the work, and you move on. But I've definitely found personally that, just positive self-talk, however woo-woo that sounds, is like it really does work. Really, really
Yeah,
does.
the mind is so powerful. And I think to get to the second part of the question, how to overcome hardship, I think that's quite a big question, and depending how you interpret hardship, can have a lot of different avenues to go down. I think the first thing to say is that we're not professionally qualified in
No.
sort of any sort of counselling or advice of this nature, but sort of
But
from but yeah, my unqualified opinion, something that I've obviously become very interested in through sports psychology, is that everyone's very shaped by their childhood experiences. So whatever narratives you have as a child will impact your mindset as an adult, positively or negatively. It could be an advantage. And examples of this being an advantage from a sporting perspective would be Michael Jordan, where the value got instilled into him that winning was everything as a young child. And I think to summarize that narrative for him, you could say that he thought that his parents, or especially his father, would value him more if he was better at basketball. So then it just became almost like a survival instinct of like, I have to be the best at basketball or I might die. That's literally the sort of feeling in his head, which becomes an incredibly powerful driver to be obsessed with the sport and obsessed with winning, which led to a lot of his success. But on the other side of that coin, you could have a narrative from your childhood where if you get things wrong, that's a life threatening situation. And you therefore have a very large fear of failure. So, my unqualified approach would be to have an assessment of what you're doing and the results that you're getting. And if you're not getting what you want, it's like training, identify what the limiter could be. And it might be your mindset, it might be your approach, in that you're not doing something because you're scared it might not work, and it might be illogical or irrational. So having some expert help maybe to look at things more objectively might
Yeah.
give you a shift in perspective to overcome that hardship.
Yeah, I mean, I've got nothing else to really add to that except the thing of, I think, being very clear on the hardship and what needs overcoming of it. So, because as I say, it does depend on exactly what it is. But yeah, I don't want to really go into any more, Lex. I think you gave a really nice answer, but it's a challenging one because I think we all do come across our own hardships at different point in our lives, and it's just, I guess it's how you approach anything in life is how you do everything. What is the saying? How you do one thing is how you do everything, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I mean, that can be argued, but I try to again have a quite a positive outlook on life and like say, okay, cool, this is very shit, but how can I turn this around to maybe have a different outlook of it? Because especially in most cases, whatever it is has already happened, and like it's then your reaction to that determines a lot on how it's going to affect you even more. Because like, you know, for instance, I say a breakup or something like that is it's going to be tough at the time, but then down the road, you know, you'll probably look back. So it's important to say grieve and go through all your stages and stuff. But yeah, it's definitely a challenging one. So we've got a question from Hannah. How to reduce hip pain / sciatic pain? It's definitely something I've had over the years. I remember having really bad sciatica from slipping a disc and yeah, some real severe discomfort. And my way I kind of got through just like day to day making it feel a bit better was I did a lot of nerve flossing and stuff like that. But I know we've touched on this. I'd like to maybe dive a little bit deeper as into why maybe nerve flossing isn't necessarily a long-term solution, even if it is just a short-term fix.
Cool. We've also got a question from James, which is
Yeah,
very similar, so we might tackle them together.
yeah.
James is saying that he's got numbness in his left arm, and it's in his front delt shoulder pain. And yeah, what might be going on, how to fix it. So I think the common thread between these two is that they sound, or they are, very nerve-based pain. And whenever you've got nerve pain, essentially that means there's some pressure on a nerve, generally from a joint closing too much and creating compression on the nerve as it passes through the joint. So the first thing to establish is which joint and which nerve is getting compressed, and where the pain goes is the biggest clue. Like each branch of the spinal cord leaving between vertebrae will go to a certain part of the body, and the sciatic nerve generally from the lumbar spine going down the hip and into the leg. So the question then is like, why is that joint space closing? Has there been an accident? Has there been too much motion between the joints to create that compression and then have the nerve pain or numbness going down the limb? And yeah, without knowing injury history of either of them or training history, we can preclude that question or put it to the side for a second. Short term, we want to get the space between those bones to open, so there's more joint space, so there's less compression on the nerve. So movements that open the joint space. So one of the things that flossing does, it basically moves. You're trying to get the nerve moving through that joint better, to relieve that pressure or desensitize the nerve. Is the other side of that, is that you're kind of rubbing it through that gap and almost overstimulating it so that you get a comparative reduction in stimulation after the flossing. But in terms of a long-term solution, we want those joints to sit without compressing the nerve, so opening up that part that's creating the compression. So if we look at the shoulder, this is probably an easier one to discuss. Where the ball of the shoulder sits in that socket joint will be, sounds like it's too far forward if he's getting anterior delt pain and he's getting numbness down the arm. We need to establish if the nerve is getting compressed in the shoulder joint itself or potentially in the cervical spine, which is where the nerves come out of the spinal cord. And then we would act differently for each of them. If it's the shoulder, we want to get that ball to sit further back in the shoulder socket. So we can do some distraction work to try and physically move the shoulder back, and he'll probably get some short-term relief from just doing some scap push-ups or something like that to just open up that joint space at the front. However, the long-term fix is to teach the shoulder to centrate, so basically keep the ball more in the middle of the socket and only move an appropriate amount in any direction that the shoulder wants to move. So that would typically involve activating and strengthening the musculature on the posterior, the backside of the shoulder, so that the shoulder can learn to be more happily situated in its socket and not create that pressure in the front of the shoulder, trapping the nerve.
Yeah, I definitely think it's like, because you want to think how much, I know with obviously him being a tradesman, like I know he carries a lot of his stuff on his left side and is in like, and the thing is we start to, obviously we have a bias with how we do everything, what side we sleep on and all this stuff. So it's really just going to be pushing that shoulder even more out of a comfortable position. And as you said there about strengthening the back, if you imagine that essentially your shoulder is being pulled forward by, say, your chest and stretching out your upper back, the more we can strengthen that upper back, it's only going to pull your shoulder back to, say, neutral, rather than, because it's so far away from neutral, that's where we're going to get the biggest win. So I think that carries across to even like most people that work in an office that say, you know, doing a lot of decent amount of upper back work and strengthening that position, because day to day where we're on our phones a lot, looking at laptops, always hunched forwards, you know, it really causes some poor postures. And not saying that you want to be like, as you said, that power pose. That's not necessarily a day-to-day posture we want to be in. But you do want to be quite tall. You want to have probably a little bit of forward flexion. I guess we don't want to be like a Superman. Right? That's
Speak for yourself, mate.
Well, okay, that's normally when you're in. But from what you've seen, is that generally like, what are your thoughts on that? Because from what I've understood, like, because if you think the general power pose is in a way quite hyperextended, if anything, you're probably gone into extension and like chest tall. So it's not really, you then kind of gone the opposite way to what everyone is at the moment, where they're slouched and in a forward position.
Yeah. So I think I can't remember if we talked about this in a previous episode, but posture is basically the average of the time you spend the positions the average of the positions you spend your time in. So whatever your habits are, whatever your job is, whatever you use your body for most of the time, it's trying to hold you close to that to make your life easier. So if you are working in front of yourself, then you're actually being more efficient by having your shoulders forwards, and that's saving you energy most of the time. However, when we move into a training environment, that might not be optimal, because if you want to bench or press overhead or pull, having your shoulders at the front of the sockets all the time doesn't give you favorable mechanics. So one thing you mentioned in that bit there was, how's the shoulder got there in the first place? So why is the shoulder sat at the front of the socket? It could be from an impact injury that it's just spazzed out and tightened up, and the balance between the muscles isn't even. So somebody has trained their chest way more than they've trained their back. The body is looking for a position of stability. So it's going to use its stronger muscles more than its weaker muscles. So if the pecs are stronger, they'll be pulling the shoulder forwards to create stability and winning that tug of war against the muscles of the upper back. So through balancing your training, that's one way we can get the shoulder to sit in a better spot, by just training more proportionally to where we want the shoulder to be. But if we found ourselves in that position, which it sounds like James has, how do we rectify it? So one would be stretching off and trying to reduce the latent tone, so that just the resting tension in the pecs, so that they will let the shoulder go back towards middle. But something's probably happened to create a sense of threat for those muscles to like tighten up and almost spasm, because it's a protective response. So you might have had a knock, you might have tried to lift something too heavy, which has then caused the sort of panic response from the body, which will be pulling the shoulder more aggressively towards the front than might happen if the shoulder was happier and more relaxed.
Beautiful, mate. I think that sums it all up nicely. So I think it's been a beautiful monologue by you today, mate. I think it's been great. You've done something. No, it's been great. Really, first of all, I just want to thank you all for all the people that submitted a question. We really do appreciate, the more interactive we get from you guys, obviously, the more we can make the podcast even more tailored towards you. Because obviously, when we come up with topics and stuff for the episodes, it's either from, questions that we get from clients or things that we've seen quite common, or just maybe they've just been plucked out of the air. But, it's definitely if you want subjects maybe a bit more towards maybe something you're interested in, do throw them across to us and we'll see what we can do. As always, just a quick reminder about the competition, just what we said at the start. If you do want an opportunity to win the movement assessment, some group coaching, a chat with Ash and myself, and that £50 WIT voucher, remember you get two entries into the competition if you subscribe on YouTube. You get 3 entries for writing a review on Apple Podcasts, and you get 1 entry for sharing an episode on Insta on your story.
Every time you share. So that's why the others are just obviously you can do it once, but that's why that sharing one really helps get the message out there. And yes, we are doing this competition to help us hopefully grow a bit more and get more exposure. So we've been completely upfront. So this episode comes out, and then on Wednesday, so by the time Thursday, when Ash and myself then go through and then pick the winner using a random name selector, we can then announce it on the 101st episode. So yeah, we'll get into that. So thank you very much as always, and thank you for listening over these past 100. If you have been here from the start, if you've just joined us late, go back, listen to some of our early ones, watch them on YouTube. You can see the evolution of my hair, my beard growth, and my location of where I'm doing the podcast, and how Ash has stayed pretty much exactly the same through these 100 episodes. So ageless.
Yeah, apart from that, thank you very much as always. Don't forget to share, like, and all that stuff. Thank you as always. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.